We're on a journey with Jesus to his resurrection. Are we taking this journey because Easter is coming? I suppose in part that is true. However, the most significant reason for this journey is that Jesus' resurrection changes everything about your life. You and I were born into this world at different times and different places. But Jesus' resurrection erases all the differences between us because Jesus offers us a common second birth. Our second birth is through the Spirit of God, making us children of God, meaning we become brothers and sisters of the same family. That was what we learned last week when Nicodemus came out of the darkness of the night and into the light of Christ. We must be born again. This week we'll continue Jesus' journey from the surrounds of Jerusalem back to the heart of Judaic practices, the temple. Most scenes in the Gospel of John focus on Jesus in the temple and the surrounding areas. Those scenes often alternate between Jesus' dialogue with people, some named and some unnamed, and a confrontation with the ruling council. And today will be no different. As we enter the scene, we find Jesus came to Jerusalem during one of the major feasts of the year. Jerusalem was swollen with people. The temple complex was crowded. Jesus approached the temple from the east through what is known as the Sheep's Gate. That's the gate through which shepherds brought sheep to be sacrificed. A short distance from that gate within the temple complex stood a water feature called the Pools of Bethesda. John said that when Jesus entered the pools that day, here a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. Let's address a couple of points in our opening scripture. First, we notice that the text omits verse number 4. Bibles did not have verse numbers until about the year 1200. At that time, verse 4 read and was included and said this: "For an angel came down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the waters. Whosoever then first was after the troubling of the waters stepped in was made whole of whatever disease they had." Now, archaeology discoveries in the 18 and 1900s found earlier manuscripts of the Bible, very early manuscripts, that weren't available in the 1200s. And those early manuscripts did not contain the words of verse 4. So editors of more modern Bible translations, such as the New International Version, concluded the words of verse 4 were not original to John's writings. So the editors removed the words of the verse, but retained the verse number. There was no angel involved in stirring of the waters. It just said, "Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years." Second, we learned during the feast when Jesus entered Jerusalem, there were many ill and disabled people at the pool. Yes, we just read that. And the area was crowded, but Jesus' eyes fell on just one person, this man who was an invalid for 38 years. John offered no reason for Jesus' focus on this man, except we discover that the man proved to be the perfect person to draw out the message of Christ. We need to keep that latter point in mind, because at any given moment, each of us may be the perfect person to share the message of Christ with another person. It's a sobering thought that just at the right moment, you may be the closest person to Christ your family, a friend, or a stranger has ever met. And in that perfect moment, Jesus wants you to make him known. On Jesus' journey, he entered the Sheep's Gate and went to the pool of Bethesda and saw many disabled people, including the one who had been an invalid for 38 years. And so Jesus asked this man, "Do you want to get well?" Jesus' question, it seems strange, because we would expect anyone who had been disabled for so long would want relief. For his part, the disabled man seemed confused by Jesus' question, as evidenced by his response. "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me in the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." We learn two things. First, we know that the man believed, as did others, that whenever the waters of the pool stirred, there was a chance, some sort of a chance for a miraculous healing. But it was only for those who could get into the pool while the water was stirred, or so they believed. You see, the man believed he was in a cruel competition. A cruel competition that favored healing only for the strongest, or the best supported of the disabled people. Mercy was not a consideration. The second thing we learn is that the man does not know Jesus. He does not know Jesus' reputation as a healer. Then Jesus said to the disabled man, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. What has just happened here? We need to visualize the scene. The area around the pools of Bethesda, they were crowded with people who were blind and lame and paralyzed. They waited for some unpredictable moment for the pool water to stir so they could dash or be carried into the water to be made well. Among those people, this able-bodied stranger, Jesus, stopped by to speak to just one man among them, a man known to be paralyzed for 38 years. The stranger commanded the invalid to get up, take his mat, and walk, and the stranger's words cured the man. Jesus cured the man. We know that if we've been ill and lay in bed for a few days, our limbs and our joints and muscles become sore and hurt when we get up. This man lay on a mat for 38 years, and he got up immediately. Now that was a miracle. Others present must have gasped in shock to see this man walk. And then before anyone could speak, this stranger who commanded the cure melded into the crowd and was gone. Those around the pool must have wondered what happened, why it didn't happen to them. John's first readers, and we wonder, what happened? And what is the meaning? The meaning began to show with John's following words. The day on which this cure took place was the Sabbath. Meaning will be found in a combination of Jesus' journey to the resurrection, his commands to the invalid at the pool of Bethesda, and the Sabbath. We're beginning to understand something about Jesus' journey to the resurrection. We learned something about the invalid in the pool of Bethesda, but we must know a bit more. We must know a bit more about the Sabbath. In the book of Exodus, God said of the Sabbath, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servants, nor your animals, nor the foreigner residing in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy." God created the Sabbath so humanity could rest and keep the day holy to God. By Jesus' time, the Jewish ruling council had developed rules and regulations that defined what was work and what was permissible on the Sabbath. These rules meant no plowing, reaping, grinding, baking, threshing, or binding sheaves. There was to be no building, no demolishing, no trapping, no shearing, no slaughtering, no skinning. The rules said could not do physical activity like burning, writing, cooking, sewing, and definitely not carrying things. And to that final point, John wrote, as so and so the Jewish leaders, that's the ruling council, said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But the healed man replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" And so the Jewish leaders asked this healed man, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick up and walk?" Again, we learn two things. First, the man caught the ruling council's attention because the man violated their Sabbath rules of carrying a mat. Who did this man think he was, violating the Sabbath's council rules and regulations? Second, we learn that the council had no interest whatsoever in the man's cure. Telling the council a stranger cured him and told him to carry the mat only shifted the council's inquiry into the stranger's identity. Who did this man who cured the invalid think he was, telling people to violate their Sabbath regulations? The miracle of the healing was of no concern whatsoever to the Jewish ruling council. But the man did not know the stranger who had healed him. We learn from this encounter that the council was more interested in acts that violated their method of following the Sabbath than they were in mercy. The council took Jesus' words to the man not as a merciful rebuke of a lifelong paralysis, but as a challenge to the council's authority. And a challenge to authority must be defended. In its rightful role of guiding the people's religious faith, the council had forgotten God's command. "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." It almost seemed as though the story was going to end there. But later, Jesus found the healed man at the temple. And he said, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away, and he told the Jewish leaders that Jesus had made him well. Here we learn three things. First, Jesus found the man in the temple. Now, this was cause for celebration because the paralyzed and the seriously ill were not allowed in the temple. Another Jewish ruling council regulation: disabled people were not permitted to worship in the temple. But now healed, the man wanted everything that had been denied to him, and so he went to the temple. Second, Jesus said that continual sin brings something worse than 38 years of paralysis. Continual sin brings hell. And so Jesus told the man, "Stop sinning." Finally, the healed man wanted people to know that Jesus and Jesus' authority to command healing. He wanted them to know that, because that was authority known only to exist in God. Now, John's readers and we might think this is an excellent day for the council. They will meet someone whose spoken word can heal, just like God. But alas, because Jesus was doing these things, these healings on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. Persecute here means to harass, to mistreat, to be hostile towards. The ruling council was only interested in Jesus submitting himself to their authority. And Jesus said in his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working." Well, for this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, But he, Jesus, was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Jesus had done it. Jesus said even on the Sabbath, God was at work, and the ruling council would have agreed. But for Jesus to call God his Father, and that he was working on the Sabbath as his Father was working on the Sabbath, that was going too far, because Jesus was making himself equal to God. And suddenly the violation of the Sabbath was pale in comparison to the blasphemy of Jesus presuming to make himself equal to God. Violating the Sabbath, well, that brought persecution. Blasphemy, though, that required death. We now understand the combination of Jesus' journey to the resurrection, his commands to the invalid at the pool of Bethesda, and the Sabbath. Jesus was deliberately going to his resurrection. It was there that salvation would be offered. Along the way to the resurrection, Jesus wanted people to know that salvation was not a cruel competition among people. Salvation was not about who was most physically fit or able to help themselves to achieve perfection. Salvation was not about the work you did, the clothing you wore, the position of authority you held. Salvation was not and is not some form of cruel competition. Instead, salvation is granted to us by mercy. God's mercy that gifts us salvation we call grace. And our access to grace is determined based upon our answer to just one question. Do you want to get well? What is meant by that question? We see the meaning through the man at the pool. The man was bound to live a life of doing the same thing. The man could not change his circumstances. The man could not find a friend strong enough to change the man's life for him. The man was without hope. The imagery of the man bound at the pool is a picture of a life, our life, bound by sin. We're confined to doing the same thing over and over. We can't break sin on our own. We don't have friends strong enough to break our sin for us. Sin is cruel. Then along came a man, a stranger at first, who asked the man at the pool, "Do you want to be well?" And then that stranger said to the man, "Get up and walk. You're no longer bound, but sin no more." Mercy had been given, mercy received. The man who had been bound was now free to share with everyone the identity of the man who freed him. The imagery of the man freed to walk is a picture of life saved by Jesus. The scene at the pool showed us the man who could make the lame walk had the power to cancel sin, and the only one who can cancel sin is God. But that message of grace is not readily accepted by those who live their life based on cruel competition, nor is it readily accepted by those who want to remain in sin. The ruling council set the rules and the procedures for the cruel competition over who could enjoy God's grace. And anyone who challenged them, anyone who challenged their rules, well, they thought must be opposed to God, and so they must be condemned. So Jesus' journey to the resurrection would require the ruling council to condemn him. Why is that? That was necessary so that the power of the resurrection, the authority of Jesus, the wrongness of such competition could become evident. But to live in the power of the resurrection, to be granted that grace, to be freed from sin, we sinners, well, we must answer one question. Do you want to get well? Consider that.